Tonight you're going to hear about Keep Betsy Beautiful. It's one of the most exciting things that we have done in the 26 years that I've been here. It is ambitious, but it is definitely needed. In 2020, our board, when everyone else was making sourdough bread, we were working on our strategic plan for 2030 and positioning ourselves based on the needs of our community. And one of the two things that we stated in that summary of our strategic plan was to be a better listener to our community and to, if needed, go off island, because as you will learn in our presentation tonight, animals do not know political boundaries. They don't know that this is the town of Kiawah, the town of Seabrook, Johns Island. They know habitat. And so as a habitat protector, that's our role in this job. And as we look back to the beginning of where we have been up until last Monday, and this is very important. So just look at where we were last Monday. The parts in the yellow are the preserved property on Kiawah, including lots. And it used to be, and I really can tell you, people say, well, what's the difference in one lot? What does that matter? Well, one lot mattered on Kiawah because it's a nesting, resting, feeding ground for habitat. And that, again, it goes back to preserving habitat. So all the little dots that you see, those are preserved lands, as well as the marshland. And as you know, we didn't think anything was ever going to happen to the marsh. You know, we're not going to ever see. That's a beautiful vista. It's never going to. Nothing's ever going to happen. And across the river now we have development, and we do see that development, and it does make a difference. The river is very, very important to the whole ecosystem of Kiawah Island, and you'll learn about that. It's the watershed is extremely important. But as of last Monday, this is what we have now. We have the complete marsh surrounding Kiawah Island. And we also have the new Limehouse Marsh property that took 2.5 years to close it. It was signed today. So that is our 250 acres across the river, and we're extremely excited about that. That's 17 conservation easements, 59 owned properties. And let me tell you, somebody asked a question, and I'm all about education. So conservation easements are when the owner of the property still owns the property, but we take the development rights, but we negotiate the rights of the property owner. So they still have rights. They can pass it to their heirs. They can still live on the property if that's the case in these areas, but the development rights have been removed and it's there for conservation value at that point. And then owned properties are properties that we own. Those are properties that we manage and control. And of course, they're always for conservation. So that's 40% of Kiawah Island, over 3,000, almost 4,000 acres now preserved. That's a huge number considering, Avril, remember, 0.5, 26 years ago. I told the board that today. 26 years ago, we had 0.5 acres under preservation. So that's a big jump. And we are very, very excited about that. So to tell you a little bit more about where we are and where we're going and how we're going to keep Betsy beautiful, I'm going to turn it over to Collie.
And Sean.
And Sean. They're going to do a double team. These are our two staff members. Collie does our habitat preservation. He has gone door to door on Johns Island. And Sean is doing restoration and enhancement. And you'll learn about the exciting programs that we have planned for land as we move forward. So, guys, take it away.
Yeah, so kind of how we tag team it, and Lee's not here today too, but we work together to preserve the land, get it under conservation, and then Sean, our newest member, kind of comes in, and then he goes, once we have land under preservation, what do we do with it? How do we enhance it, and so forth. But before Sean kicks us off, just want to thank you all again for being here. We thoroughly believe in what we do at the Kiawah Conservancy. I've grown up in Charleston on James Island, and getting the job at Kiawah Conservancy has been a dream come true. I've always been on Johns Island, spent time on Kiawah, and being able to give back to Charleston, which all this is by preserving land, is just wonderful. So thank you all. Our work is not possible without the community support. So.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, again. I want to just mention what our mission is, and it's to measure, manage, improve, and advocate for the ecological health of Kiawah Island and its environs. So when we have the new strategic plan in 2020 that Donna spoke about, we started taking an approach to look at the entire area and its environs, and what the environs mean. And so we know that the wildlife flow through Kiawah, Seabrook, and Johns Island, and so we really needed to start taking an approach to preserve land everywhere in our watershed. And so we have a watershed-based approach. This shows our geographical extent. The water flows all throughout this area, so what happens on Johns Island impacts Seabrook and Kiawah, and vice versa. So it's really important for us to use this approach for our strategy for conservation. And this led us to look at preservation on Johns Island. A lot of the land on Seabrook, Cacique, and Kiawah has already been preserved. We're continuing to preserve land on those areas, but we know that we need to preserve some of the green space, natural areas on Johns Island and the entryway into Kiawah and Seabrook. So we're focusing primarily on the area from Freshfields Roundabout to River Road. And we're calling that the Betsy Beautiful Parkway, and that's why we're calling this kind of program and campaign that we're working on Keep Betsy Beautiful. The reason we have a watershed-based approach is because we know how water flows in this area. These are stream lines that are created through some of our geospatial research that we do. We know that the area along Betsy Beautiful Parkway impacts all of the surrounding watershed. So any kind of development that happens along Betsy Beautiful can lead to water quality impairments, flooding, a lot of concerns in the area of Bohicket Creek, the Kiawah River, and just the entire area that we're focusing on.
And just again, so everything that happens on Johns Island affects Kiawah, Seabrook, and vice versa. We're all connected through the watershed, and that's what kind of gave us our direction as we did the new strategic plan, and that's how we strategize our preservation efforts. So.
And the watershed is really important because we're noticing that over time we're seeing impairments to our waterways. So this is a map from SCDNR and SCDHEC. They do water quality sampling and measuring in the area and throughout the state. And the areas that you see in blue, the triangles, those are testing sites. This map was created based on the testing sites, and we've seen that there's been recent shellfish bed closures in the area. That means that these shellfish are not safe for human consumption. So the areas that are hashed here and here are closed completely. So humans should not be harvesting these shellfish and eating them. And what this shows us is that there are impairments in the waterway, and that there's fecal coliform, and that's what's really causing the shellfish bed closures. And fecal coliform can come from stormwater runoff after a rain event. It can be from pet waste, septic tanks. It can be from agriculture. So these are sources of pollution that we're not quite sure about, but we do know that these areas are not meant for consumption of shellfish.
So this is just a snapshot. Basically, the entire Bohicket Creek is shut down, right? And then as we look to the Kiawah River, this is everywhere from the river course down to Captain Sam's Spit. And so, I mean, these are waters that we're very familiar with, and just being here local, you would hope that these waters are clean enough to be able to harvest these oysters, but the reality at this point, they're not.
And what we're trying to hit home here is that we want to have a watershed-based approach because we know that the contamination isn't necessarily right here. It could be from upland areas, much farther north, but it all flows. And so what we need to do is start protecting open space, open green space. It helps for flooding, and it helps for the filtration of stormwater. And that's really what's causing a lot of these issues.
Okay. So the heart of our organization revolves around wildlife. Everything that we do for conservation is wildlife first. We've always been about wildlife and protecting wildlife habitat. We know from our data and the town's data about our collared bobcats, as you can see on this map, our bobcats are not just on Kiawah Island. They travel to and from Johns Island and Seabrook each and every day, we've documented them going all the way up to West Ashley. So it is super important for our wildlife, not just bobcats, but this is talking about migratory bird species, our insects, our native plants, everything is so critical throughout the entire region. And we have to make sure that these animals, they depend on this wildlife corridor, these natural habitats, not just on Kiawah, but beyond, to be able to move freely and have that habitat, that food spot, the resting and traveling. So it's just as important to protect land outside of Kiawah as it is on the island itself.
And it's, we know where the bobcat are. We know that these are great areas for wildlife, great green spaces. But here on the map, we're showing the preserved areas. This is a national database, so this is including the Kiawah Conservancy and other land trusts where land is preserved. And you can see along here, this wildlife corridor is not protected right now. And so that led us to our strategy. So not only do we have a watershed-based approach, but we're looking at where is the habitat that's really important for wildlife. And so we have targeted now a few properties that we'll talk about here shortly, but that's how we do our management. We use science, we use data, and we create a strategy for land preservation, and that's how we've targeted these properties. So you can see here just exactly where, this is all preserved land. You can see all the bobcats here, and they're traveling along this corridor. So it's really important for us to start preserving this area here before it becomes developed.
Sean mentioned that we use data and other resources as we prioritize land, but we're also opportunists. I mean, when opportunities arise, we have to be able to go after them when they are available. So what we're presenting to you is our initial part of our effort to keep Betsy beautiful. What I'm going to talk about now is the 3 main properties, 2 of which we've already acquired and 1 that we are set to acquire. Starting with the rail track, that turned out to be 76 acres of land that stretches from Betsy Harrison Parkway out to Bohiggett Creek. You might be wondering about the dotted lines. Initially when we were acquiring this land, we thought we were just getting the mainland and the Hummock Islands that totaled up to 15 acres, but it turned out that the landowner also had the marsh as well, and so he was able to deed the marsh over to us. And if you're not familiar with how marshlands work, you have to have ownership over marsh, you have to have a deed that dates back all the way to the King's Grant, and so without that, the state would own the property. Kiawah is really unique in that Kiawah has the deed all the way back from the grant for all of our marshes. So very, very special. And also we get the question, well, why is marsh so important to protect? You can't develop it. Well, in a way you can. You can put docks out there. We see Hummock Islands developed all the time, but it also gives a stewarding eye over those properties as well. Where can we put in marsh restoration projects and seeing how the health of our marsh is doing. So just below the rail track was the Rosebank Farm Stand property. You're all familiar with where this is. Side-Eye and Louise are huge supporters of us in our effort here. They're moving over to Kiawah River. This property was already being sold as we were buying the rail track, but the buyer for the Rosebank Farm Stand property fell through, and that opened the opportunity for us because we had already made those phone calls. We had talked to the people that were involved, and we said, if something happens, let us know. We'll make a way to make it happen. And so the opportunity came to us, and we were actually then having 2 properties on our plate to close on. And so that was another 3 acres. So just there, you're looking at 79 acres. And then farther south is the Hayward tract, almost another 6 acres of property. We are set to close on this. All we were waiting for is clean title. Heirs property is an issue on Johns Island, and that was the case here, but we are in contract and we're set to close. But so then how do we fill the gap? Because what we're trying to do here is build a cornerstone of preservation, a building block to move forward on. And so with that, we have a pending purchase of the land just between the rail track and Rosebank Farm Stand. That'll be another 8 acres of contiguous preservation. And then we have some other target properties that we're going to go after in the near future as well. And so as we look at the big picture here, in just a quarter-mile stretch, we'll have 79 acres purchased, and then total through easements and land purchase, we're looking at 94 acres within a quarter-mile stretch. That is huge. We all know, I mean, Betsy Harrison Parkway is not a tremendously long road, but there's a lot of vital habitat in there, and this is a huge impact to that environment. And so this is just a general flyover so you can see what we're working with here. That's going over the Rosebank property, looking out over to Bohica Creek. All of these properties are connected to the vital river or creek that's right there. And this is looking back over, giving you that perspective of all the habitat that lies within along the Betsy Harrison Parkway, the dense canopies, and just the amount of vegetation that's there and that is home to so much wildlife. I like this image a lot too, because if you can envision yourself on these properties, this is what you'd be immersed in. And this is, as you look back to Kiawah Island, this is how close we are to Kiawah with these properties. And so wildlife is certainly important, but there's also other aspects to consider, and I'm going to let Sean talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so another reason that we think that preserving land along Betsy Harrison Parkway is important because it's really the entryway to the Sea Islands. And I think a lot of people come down here either to visit or to live here because of that sense of place and that connection with nature and culture. It's what makes the Low Country so great. You have the basket weavers, you have local farmers, you have the rural nature of Johns Island, and that's something that we also want to continue to protect. We don't want to see Johns Island turn into just urban sprawl and development everywhere. And so we're doing our part to try to help preserve the land around here and also to hopefully help give back to the community. And one project that we've been working on is working with the sweetgrass basket weavers in the area. Because of a lot of development in the area all along the coast, there's been a lack of access to sweetgrass. One of the main plants that is used in the sweetgrass baskets, it grows naturally here in the Low Country. It's a native plant, and it used to be that you could just go out and harvest it. The basket weavers could find it along the marshes and all throughout the Low Country. Well, now it's harder and harder for them to access it, and they really need help. They've asked us, can we help them? Can we start growing the plants so that they can harvest it? And Kali actually went out and spoke to a few basket weavers, and they were the ones who mentioned to us that access was a problem. So we've been harvesting seeds, we've been growing it, we have a farm, and we've been working with Corey Alston, who's a basket weaver, and Marilyn Hemingway, who's president and founder of the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to let Corey talk in his own words about this project, and then I'll give a little bit more details after.
I'm Corey Alston. I'm from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. I'm a sweetgrass basket maker. I've been weaving sweetgrass baskets now for 21 years, learning from my in-laws that actually made me run the family business now. Finding the sweetgrass today is definitely difficult to find this softer texture, and the reason why is because the softer grasses would be more in areas that we have now known as private properties. The importance of having sweetgrass, it actually sustains our skill. Gullah sweetgrass baskets is known as the South Carolina State handcraft. We have no handcraft without having material. With the Kiawah Conservancy partnering up with the basket makers of our area, it's bigger than I can imagine. It's bigger than me as a basket maker of today. It's generational. By having these grasses that we can harvest, that's untreated, unfertilized, dried, and used for weaving I'm lost for words for that.
You mentioned a word that is privatized, and that's, the loss is not that there's not sweetgrass out there, it's just access to it. Where it grows naturally is becoming more and more privatized, and they're not able to access it as much. And what we're trying to do is just be able to provide that sweetgrass easier to them. So.
Our idea is to make another area that's going to be public. And so what do we do with the land once we get the land? We preserve it in its natural state. We try to restore and enhance it. And something we're doing now is a public trail system and a public access component with the farm. And so we're doing a sweetgrass demonstration farm at the Rosebank farm stand. If you saw in the video flyover, there was 3 buildings. Those are old migrant housing. They're really falling apart. We're going to demolish those. We're going to plant more sweetgrass there, and we're going to turn it into a demonstration area. So we're going to have interpretive signage that talks about the importance of sweetgrass, the culture of sweetgrass, and why land preservation is so important. That's really what we're going to do is connect people with the land and tell the story of why the Low Country is important in the natural spaces. So this is something that we've gotten South Carolina Conservation Bank funding. We've gotten Charleston County Greenbelt funding. They're really interested in this project, and rightfully so, because not only are we going to be growing more grass that's going to be harvested and donated to the basket weavers, but we're going to be telling the story about why land preservation is so important. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the ROW track, the one that's right next to Rosebank Farm Stand, is going to be turned into a trail system. We're not going to be removing very many trees at all. It's going to be mostly clearing some of the understory brush, but that will be a trail system. Purchasing that property in the middle that we talked about is important because we're going to connect all that land, and it will be open to the public and allow people to have access to the marsh and the hummock islands as well.
And we're not going to dive too far into this, but what we want to show to you here is Charleston County's land use map. Essentially, so what this shows you here is what this area is zoned for, what they believed when they did this was appropriate. You can see that most of the southern portion of Johns Island is about rural, residential, agricultural lands, but we also do have like an urban, suburban area as well. And one tool that we have to help us here is the urban growth boundary line. The Conservancy is not against development. We're just more so for the right development in the right place. And so the urban growth boundary line is simply just a tool to help council and the community decide where urban growth should be and where rural areas should stay in that kind of zoning. But what we're seeing often now is that urban growth boundary line is being tested and being pushed. And now it's all about just smart growth and keeping this large-scale development contained in an area that's suitable for it. And so we've seen recently an onslaught of development pressures, high-scale, large-density development hitting Johns Island and Betsy Carrison Parkway in particular. A few examples that you might be familiar with, Bohicket Marina expansion, that's one that was really testing that urban growth boundary line. There's different opinions on whether or not that would be good or if it fits the area, but it's just setting a precedent that if we move that boundary line, people are going to want to keep doing that. And where's it going to stop? Across, you have the Hollover Creek property. That's subject to residential housing. The way it's zoned, we can't touch that. If you have the right to build something there, we're not going to argue that. It's when you go for upscale development, that's where we come and advocate. But still, it's something that we'd rather see not developed or smaller. But then you have the Health and Wellness Village proposed for Betsy Carrison Parkway. These are just examples of some real-time development pressures hitting our area. There's not many people working in conservation on this end of Johns Island, except for us, and the impact that we're going to be able to make is going to last for generations. If it weren't for us, then it would, we'd be seeing this a lot more.
And I want to mention, Kali said upscale. I think what he meant was upzoning. So taking something like R4 residential and turning it into commercial. That's when we, as an organization, would say that maybe that's not the best use of the land, and we want to support the intended land use and what the property owner already currently is zoned for.
And so what our properties here that we've been able to put before you do is they help solidify that urban growth boundary line to make sure that it does not pass over, because in order to move that boundary line as well, it has to be contiguous land. And so we've stopped the break here so that it wouldn't be able to jump past that mark. And so that's a huge impact. People ask us, do you really think that you can make a difference here? What will these lands do? They already have made a difference. And what we're going to continue to do will make an impact not just for today's generation, but for future generations as well. And that's the whole message behind Keep Betsy Beautiful. Every time you come to Kiawah or Seabrook, it doesn't start at your end place. It starts when you hit those rural roads, those scenic highways, and what defines the low country. And before you go too far, I just kind of want to remind people, Don alluded to this, we have conservation easements and we also have the ability to purchase land. Those are our two primary ways for conservation. We would love to do more conservation easements, and we still strive for them and do them when possible. But in reality, much of this land has been sold. It's not necessarily in a family that's had it for generations. They don't have that emotional tie to it. And so most people are looking for a buyout. Luckily, we have the opportunity as a land trust to be able to purchase lands, and we have the ability to go out to Greenbelt, South Carolina Conservation Bank, and apply for grants. But with that comes matching dollars, and that's what we have to do, and that's the whole fundraiser with Keep Betsy Beautiful. Being born and raised in Charleston on James Island, naturally I've spent a lot of my time growing up on Johns Island and the greater Low Country, being able to enjoy all the natural benefits of the world that the Low Country has to offer. I was raised primarily by my granddaddy, Jack Anderson, who taught me how to hunt and fish, and just took me all around the back roads. A particular story one time was when my grandfather and I were on the way to our hunting club. We were going down the dirt road, and we pulled over, and we were just observing some wildlife, and there were a couple vultures on the power line. And the first thing I said was, "Granddad, can I shoot them?" And he looked at me with such disappointment. I said, no, son, you can't. And that made me feel pretty bad listening to how he said that and the way he looked at me. But then he went on to say why, and taught me how everything in the environment plays a role in this world, including humans, and we have to do our part too. And so we have to respect the environment, we have to grow with it and not against it. So Johns Island is really unique in many ways. It's really the last place that you can travel in Charleston that you can still find dove fields, agricultural farming land, wild turkeys, wild deer. Anywhere else has been mostly developed, and what we have here on Johns Island is pretty unique. Pressure is hitting Johns Island and Betsy Carrison Parkway in particular at an alarming rate. Our conservation work on Johns Island can't be done alone. And this is where we need your help and where you can come in to play your role and leave an impact for generations to come. And that is the start of our kickoff to Keep Betsy Beautiful.
So I'm Teresa Termine. I'm the Advancement Associate for the Kiawah Conservancy, and I want to thank you all for being here today and for showing your interest in our Keep Betsy Beautiful campaign. We truly believe this is one of the most important things the Kiawah Conservancy has ever done. Preserving land on Kiawah is our mission, and we've done it for 26 years, and we've preserved as much as we can. There's not much left to preserve, but we do have a responsibility to steward those lands in perpetuity. And part of that stewardship means protecting them from all the things that affect them. And some of the things that will affect them is what comes from Johns Island, what comes from the watershed, and that's why we chose a watershed approach. But also, Seabrook are our neighbors, Johns Island are our neighbors. We are all a community together in sharing the values of this low country and our love for it. And so we thank you for being here and for listening. So how are we doing this and how are we paying for it? I will tell you the first two properties that we have purchased and now own were a little bit over $2 million. We received funding from South Carolina Conservation Bank and the Charleston County Greenbelt funds for about $1.4 million. And we raised the matching $700,000, remaining $700,000 in about 6 weeks. So we own those properties outright and are debt-free, thank the good Lord. It was a little sweating there for a minute. The third property, we have also received Greenbelt funds, and we have the money in the bank to pay for that as soon as we get clean title and can close on it. So those three properties are our preservation cornerstone, but they're only the beginning. The property that we showed you that connects the rail track to Rosebank, we hope to acquire by next spring. So we will be fundraising for that property and hopefully also getting Greenbelt funds. There's an interesting piece on that property that there's a house, so Greenbelt is not going to fund a property. So we will have to raise the funds for that, the value of that house. So you're going to hear about us. We're going to be fundraising for quite a while because we can't stop this campaign. Betsy Carrison Parkway is 3 miles long. We know we're not going to preserve the 3-mile stretch from Bohicket to the river. That is not realistic, but we know if we can create contiguous pockets along Betsy Carrison, not just the left side, but the right side too, we can stop development. And we can stop it from trickling down, and we can make a difference in our watershed. And You know, we've had some naysayers, oh, do you really think you're making an impact? We already have made an impact, and we know that. We know that that urban growth boundary line is not going to be able to migrate too far from where we've preserved. We're going to continue to work for it. We believe so strongly in this. Johns Island is a unique place. It is the last rural place in the Charleston area. And it has so much history and so much cultural impact, beyond which it's just simply beautiful. And I think as residents of Kiawah and Seabrook, sometimes we take it for granted because we drive through it. But when you stop and see it and you look at it, it's part of our experience. And to speak to that, I want to ask Cindy McKinley to come up. She has a unique perspective on Kiawah and Johns Island.
So I am Cindy. I spoke up at the first event they had, and they asked me to come back and speak again. They think I'm joking, but I'm really just here for the food. I don't want to cook dinner. My family, do I have to stand?
Yeah, because we're taking you.
Yeah. Okay. My family had a house on Kiawah in the 90s, and we didn't really know a whole lot about Johns Island back then. We kind of just drove through it. And there wasn't a whole lot of development going on. It was very similar to the way it had been probably for the last century. But after my parents sold their property, my husband and I had to get back here. So we actually live on Betsy Harrison now. And we are surrounded with woods like what you saw in those pictures. And when we go kayaking, we see deer swimming across to Wadmalaw. And Wadmalaw is very rural still, partially because they do have a lot of easements on that island. Johns Island is kind of doing this piecemeal thing now, where things are getting put in, and there isn't a whole lot of organization on what's going on. And we came from South Charlotte, and we saw what happened when they built that outer belt, and things just started going. And I would argue, I just thought of this, that any money that's going into Betsy Harrison Parkway and preserving that is actually in a way kind of a threefold win, because on Kiawah, when they are protecting properties, they're probably protecting it from maybe a house going on it. Kiawah people also have plenty of access to the water, the beach, and everything. The people on Johns Island don't have a lot of access to the water. So the first win is that by the Conservancy creating these sort of trail systems, they're doing some good for the people on Johns Island. The second win is it's protecting it from development so that what could have gone there isn't going to happen now. And there was a third one, which I completely forgot now. But I just think that it's pretty awesome, and I would say that it really just takes one person. If anybody knows about Angel Oak, and you know that Samantha Siebel with the Low Country Land Trust was the one person who said, I don't want this development happening. They were going to build a housing complex right there. And they now have 44 acres that they're going to turn into a lovely park. So it just takes one or two people to speak up and make a difference. And so, keep Betsy beautiful.
So again, I want to thank you very much for coming. Donna's going to speak to a few other issues, but I would ask you, my ask to you is to please share our message with your friends and neighbors, to let other people know what we're doing to keep Betsy beautiful, and to potentially donate when you can. Yeah. We try not to be annoying, and we try not to ask too many times, but we can't do this without your help, both with your advocacy and your financial support. So thank you again very much. Donna?